If you are listening to this right now, chances are, you know, the exact sensation of being completely just fundamentally overwhelmed.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Because we're living in this era of, well, pure information overload. You have endless notifications lighting up your screen, constant distractions pulling at your attention, and just it's this exhausting nonstop pursuit of the next big thing.
Right. It's like a collective exhaustion.
Exactly. We're all essentially running on this massive collective treadmill, trying to optimize our routines, trying to acquire more status or wealth, basically trying to finally arrive at some imagined future state of happiness. But for this deep dive, we're going to step off that treadmill entirely because we are looking at a profoundly different map for how to navigate human existence.
It really is. It's a complete paradigm shift. The source we're exploring today doesn't just suggest, tweaking your daily routine or adding a habit. It demands a total reevaluation of how you interact with reality itself.
Yeah, and we have a fascinating translation of a spiritual text in front of us today. These are the writings of Guru Ram Das Ji, specifically from Rag Dhanaasaree, Chhant, 4th Mehla, 1st house. Now, our mission today, it's not about memorizing ancient historical data.
Right, no quizzes here.
Right. It is about exploring a timeless, deeply practical framework for finding ultimate inner peace. We're really looking at the mechanics of spiritual awakening as described in this deeply profound poetry.
And while the language is incredibly poetic, it operates as a highly precise philosophical framework. What strikes you immediately when examining Guru Ram Das Ji's writings is this stark, almost jarring contrast established right from the beginning. On one side, you have the description of a life lived entirely within the confines of the human ego, like a life full of anxiety, constant grasping, and inevitable suffering. And then on the other side, you have a life transformed by divine grace, characterized by absolute tranquility and clarity.
It's a massive contrast.
It really is. This philosophy doesn't just, pat you on the back and tell you to be peaceful.
Yeah.
It dissects the exact mechanics of why we suffer and how we are ultimately liberated.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the very first concept introduced in the poetry is arguably the most challenging for our modern mindset to accept. It all starts with divine grace, or kripa.
Kripa.
There's a line here that translates to, quote, "When the dear Lord grants his grace, one meditates on the name of the Lord." And later in that same stanza, it explicitly reinforces this. It says the Creator himself acts, and only when he gives do we receive.
What's fascinating here is how that directly confronts how we live today.
Yeah, because wait, that completely contradicts the modern meritocratic mindset. I mean, if spiritual awakening relies entirely on grace, doesn't that make human effort pointless? Why even try if I can't, earn it?
That is exactly the friction this concept is meant to provoke. I mean, in almost every other area of life, you were taught an equation, right? Effort equals reward.
Right. Study hard, get the grade.
Exactly. You hustle at the office, you get the promotion. But this philosophy is making a very specific claim about spiritual awakening. You cannot force it. It is not a trophy for the human ego to win. It is a gift.
So you really can't just, muscle your way into enlightenment by meditating for thousands of hours.
No, because the very act of trying to, as you say, muscle your way in, that is an act of the ego itself. The ego wants to say, hey, I put in the work, therefore the universe owes me peace.
Ah, I see.
But this framework suggests the ability to truly connect with the divine name. The name only happens when grace is granted. Think of it like trying to force yourself to fall asleep.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. The harder you try to sleep, the more awake you become. You can't achieve sleep through sheer willpower. You can only create the right conditions, surrender your effort, and allow sleep to overtake you. You're not conquering the spiritual path, you're receiving it.
Wow, that significantly shifts the perspective from aggressive acquisition to quiet receptivity. And once that grace is present, the writings talk about meeting the true guru through loving faith and devotion. What happens next is described using this beautiful natural metaphor. It suggests that by intuitively singing the glorious praises of the divine continually, a person blossoms forth.
Blossoms forth, yeah.
It implies something entirely organic, like a flower opening, not because it's strained and pushed to open, but because the sun just happened to shine on it.
The natural consequence of grace is this outpouring of devotion. And it's crucial to understand that this isn't necessarily about singing literal songs with your vocal cords. It is about a fundamental orientation of the human mind.
Okay, how so?
Well, by focusing your attention outward on the vastness of the divine, the name, and feeling that true, distinct reverence, something mechanical actually shifts within the psyche. The poetry explains that egotism, self-conceit, and Maya are naturally forsaken.
Let's pause on Maya for a second. That's often translated as illusion, right?
Yeah.
Are we talking about the illusion of the material world?
Yes, exactly. Think of Maya like a highly convincing virtual reality headset that we are all just born wearing.
A VR headset. I love that.
It convinces us that the temporary material things around us, wealth, status, our physical bodies, that these are the ultimate permanent reality. And because we believe the illusion, we obsess over it.
You take it totally seriously.
Completely. But when you are entirely absorbed in the vastness of the divine through grace, you start to see the edges of the VR screen. The petty concerns of the ego naturally fall away because you are looking at something so much greater. You don't have to actively fight your ego. It just becomes irrelevant.
That makes so much sense. And the sensory details used to describe this experience in the text are just fascinating. It portrays simply hearing about the divine as satisfying the mind, describing it as drinking an ambrosial nectar.
Ambrosial nectar, yes.
In a modern world where we consume so much mental junk food, doom scrolling, outrage media, superficial entertainment, this really frames spiritual connection as something deeply, fundamentally nourishing. It's like finally drinking pure water after a lifetime of surviving on sugary sodas.
And that nourishment provides profound clarity. The writings note that when grace is bestowed, one develops a discriminating intellect. The term used in the text is bibek bud.
Bibek bud.
Yeah, and this is a crucial concept. It means you aren't just blindly floating through life in some blissed-out detached days. A discriminating intellect is the sharp, clear ability to contemplate reality and see things exactly as they are, without the distortion of your own ego, your desires, or the illusions of Maya.
But if this profound realization relies entirely on grace and an internal shift in the intellect, are we just supposed to sit alone in a room and wait for it to hit us? Like, how does this actually play out in human society?
That is where the practical application really comes in. And the writings address this head-on by highlighting the absolute necessity of community. It outlines that by great good fortune, one joins the Satsangat, the true congregation. This spiritual transformation doesn't happen in a vacuum.
So who you surround yourself with is a literal mechanism for spiritual growth.
Absolutely. We absorb the energy, the anxieties, and the values of the people around us. If you are surrounded by people frantically chasing material wealth, that becomes your reality.
Right. You catch their stress.
You do. But in the true congregation, the person who is guru-centered, referred to as the gurmukh, begins to truly savor the subtle essence of the divine. They remain lovingly focused and surrounded by that shared intention. The result is that they merge into a state of celestial peace.
Celestial peace. But the writings describe the person who achieves this state with a very specific, almost radical idea of what peace looks like. It states that this person is liberated from both pleasure and pain. They are pleased by whatever God does. Now, liberated from pain, every human being on earth wants that. But liberated from pleasure, that is a terrifying concept to a modern brain.
It is a profound psychological insight, actually, and it requires a total rewiring of how we understand happiness. We spend our entire lives on a treadmill, running away from pain and sprinting toward pleasure.
Yes.
But the pursuit of pleasure is its own kind of cage, isn't it? You get the new car, the new job title, the new relationship, and the dopamine spikes. But then the novelty fades, the pleasure drops, and you are immediately hungry for the next hit. You become a slave to the cycle of acquisition.
You are constantly on the hook. You need the world to behave exactly as you want it to so you can feel good.
Right. To be liberated from pleasure doesn't mean you become a numb robot who can't enjoy a good meal or a beautiful sunset. It means you are no longer manipulated by your craving for it. You are fundamentally unattached.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. The poetry illustrates a person who remains forever unattached and untouched by the frantic grasping of the world. They find a deep, steady joy simply in whatever reality presents to them. They don't need to force a dopamine spike to feel complete.
That paints a very stark picture of what true freedom looks like. But Guru Ram Das Ji doesn't just leave us with that beautiful image of the Gurmukh. Here's where it gets really interesting. The philosophy immediately pivots to show us the exact opposite. It introduces the manmukh, the self-willed person. And the contrast is heavy.
It has to be heavy. This is the mirror being held up to the default state of human existence. The manmukh represents all of us when we are operating purely from our ego, disconnected from grace, trying to pilot our lives through sheer willpower. The writing described them as being trapped in the love of duality.
Let's clarify duality. Is that the belief that you are entirely separate from the universe, separate from the divine, and separate from everyone else?
Precisely. And if you fundamentally believe you are a completely isolated fragment in a hostile universe, what happens? You feel terribly vulnerable.
Truly.
You feel you have to protect yourself, hoard resources, acquire things, and constantly fight against everyone else just to survive.
That perfectly describes the underlying existential dread driving so much of modern society. And the imagery used to describe the result of this duality is visceral. It says the messenger of death constantly eyes the self-willed Manmuk, and they cry and howl day and night, caught by the pain of Maya.
When you are living in duality, you are constantly aware of your own mortality, whether consciously or subconsciously. You know that everything you are frantically building can be taken away. That is the pain of Maya, the pain of clinging to an illusion.
There is a line that pinpoints exactly what this suffering sounds like. It describes the ego-driven person passing their life crying out, mine, mine. I read that and immediately thought of how we operate today. We obsess over our LinkedIn titles, we hoard real estate, we hyper-fixate on the daily fluctuations of our stock portfolios, aggressively declaring, this is mine.
Mine is the ultimate delusion of ownership. It is the ego desperately trying to hold on to water. We fiercely defend our bank accounts, our status, even our relationships as our personal property.
Yeah.
But maintaining that delusion requires immense, constant energy. It breeds endless anxiety, and as the poetry notes, the Manmuk is provoked by ego into wrath. When someone threatens what is yours, you become angry. And in all this frantic hoarding and defending, they completely fail to remember the divine, the actual source of all these temporary gifts.
It is a tragic misdirection of human energy, worshipping the gifts and completely ignoring the giver. And the writings do not shy away from the inevitable conclusion of this lifestyle. It forces you to confront the ultimate reality check.
Yes, the logical conclusion of this philosophical framework becomes unavoidable at the end of a human life. The text offers a chilling, entirely practical reminder. It states that in the end, the self-willed person departs regretting and repenting. Why? Because without that spiritual connection, without the Naam, nothing shall go along with them. Not their children, not their spouse, and none of the material enticements of Maya.
That is the harsh truth we spend billions of dollars as a society trying to distract ourselves from. You can spend 80 years screaming, mine, mine, building a massive fortress of material wealth and social prestige. And at the end of the line, you cannot take a single brick with you.
Not a single one.
The illusion of Maya shatters, and if that illusion was all you had, you are left with nothing but regret.
The contrast drawn here is absolute. The Gurmukh, who gave up the illusion of control and surrendered to grace, finds eternal peace. The Manmukh, who spent their entire existence trying to control everything and own everything, ends up consumed by the realization that they owned nothing at all.
That is a difficult concept to swallow, but the journey mapped out in Dhanaasaree doesn't leave the reader in that dark place of existential dread. It brings the journey full circle back to the solution. In the final portion, we return to the very first concept, grace. The line reads, granting his grace, the Lord has merged me with himself.
We arrive exactly where we started, but now with the full realization of what has actually occurred. The frantic, howling ego has been entirely bypassed.
And it provides an incredibly striking visual to represent this ultimate state. It describes standing with palms pressed together, having finally found the mansion of the Lord's presence. Just picture that posture, standing with palms pressed together. It is the universal human symbol of reverence, of humility, and of total, absolute surrender. There is no more fighting the universe. You have finally arrived.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what we are really talking about is the concept of hukam. Hukam translates to the divine will, or the Lord's command. The philosophy explains that when a person becomes pleasing to the divine mind through this devotion, they merge entirely into this hukam.
Let's ground that. What does merging into the divine command actually look like for someone living their life on a random Tuesday afternoon?
It is the ultimate elimination of psychological friction. Think about why we suffer on a Tuesday afternoon. We suffer because reality is unfolding in one way. Maybe you lost your job, maybe you're stuck in traffic, maybe it's raining on your vacation, and your ego is aggressively demanding that reality be different. You are constantly swimming against the riptide of the universe.
And swimming against a riptide just exhausts you until you drown.
Exactly. Merging into hukam means you stop fighting the current. You recognize that everything, every joy, every single breath is unfolding according to a vast divine will that you do not need to control. You simply swim parallel. The text explicitly states that by surrendering to this hukam, one finds peace. It is almost a mathematical certainty. If suffering is caused by the friction between the ego's desires and reality, then eliminating the ego's demands leaves nothing but peace.
And the ultimate reward of this state is described as glorious greatness and eternal honor. It is an enduring honor in this world and the next, which is the direct antithesis of the fleeting, temporary status that the Manmuk was so desperately chasing on LinkedIn.
It represents a profound, lasting fulfillment. The spiritual practice is no longer a forced discipline or a chore. The name itself becomes pleasing to the mind. The struggle is over, and it becomes the natural, joyful state of existence.
So what does this all mean? We have journeyed through an incredibly dense, profoundly beautiful map of the human soul today. We started with the realization that true awakening isn't something you can hustle your way into. It begins with the spark of divine grace, which requires surrender, not effort. We saw how that grace pulls us into a true congregation where we learn to shed the VR headset of Maya.
Yes.
We looked closely at the terrifying alternative, the Manmuk, trapped in the illusion of duality, howling in pain, wasting a lifetime crying out, "Mine! Mine!" only to leave this earth entirely empty-handed. And finally, we saw the ultimate resolution, standing with palms pressed together, surrendering the ego to the divine command and finding lasting, frictionless peace in the mansion of the Lord's presence.
And while these teachings of Guru Ram Das Ji are deeply spiritual, I think for you listening today, the practical application is immediate. It asks you to perform a ruthless audit on your own mind right now. Look at your daily anxieties. Look at your stress levels. What are you desperately clutching right now, crying out, "Mine, mine"? Is it your career trajectory, your public image, a relationship you're trying to control? This philosophy reminds us gently but firmly that true peace will never ever come from endless acquiring. It only comes from surrender.
You cannot acquire your way to peace. And that actually brings me to one final provocative thought I want to leave you with to mull over. We talked earlier about how the spiritually awakened person, according to this framework, is liberated from both pleasure and pain. They accept whatever the divine does. In our modern world, we spend almost 100% of our energy trying to avoid pain and relentlessly chasing after pleasure. We curate our lives, our social media feeds, and our bank accounts to maximize feeling good and minimize feeling bad. But what if he simply stopped?
That is the real question.
What would your life actually look like tomorrow morning if you woke up and stopped running from pain and stopped chasing pleasure? What if, instead, you accepted both of them equally as the unfolding will of the divine?
That is the kind of question that can change the entire trajectory of a human life.
It is the ultimate challenge to the ego. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the profound, timeless teachings of Guru Ram Das Ji. We wish you clarity, we wish you grace, and we wish you true peace.